So, yes, part 3 of the SpongeBob ranking series will be out sometime this week, and Fairly Odd Parents Season 3 will be out sometime after that. But in the meantime, I didn't want this channel to be dry, so I think it's time I finally talked about the show every cartoon reviewer has talked about at least once on their channel. While, to some degree, I do think Teen Titans Go gets too much hate, I can absolutely understand why people don't like it. It's a show about loud and obnoxious characters being self-aware that they're loud and obnoxious. However, instead of actually doing something with that premise, Go seems to just assume that being self-aware of your flaws is the first and only step in deconstructing them. Because of this lazy approach to writing episodes, it causes the satire to rarely hit like it's supposed to. And the worst part of this is that it's doing this with familiar characters that people know and love. I might get criticized for joining a bandwagon here, as this show does seem to really be hated by the internet, and if you want to call me a hater, that's fine, but I really don't know how much water that sentiment holds when you realize that most people would leave this show alone if it weren't made with characters that people were really attached to. Many people, myself included, were fans of the original Teen Titans, and I imagine that's why it saddens us so much to see this show be as bad as it is. Now, is it the worst thing ever? No. In fact, this might be the best thing I've ever given a negative review to. But I'm not going to be pulling any punches, because I know contempt when I see it, and this show is a manifestation of contempt in its purest form. Is it possible to do a review like this without mentioning the original? Yes. Yes it is. Would it be stupid to do so? Also yes. If you plan on rebooting something, there has to be a point in rebooting that thing. What's frustrating about this reboot, remake, sequel, whatever you want to call it, is that there was actually potential, considering that the worst thing about the original Teen Titans was how it ended. There were unanswered questions that could have been explored more, loose ends to be tied, to the point that they literally introduced new plot threads in the final episode specifically to not answer them. This is why I think the internet got a bit carried away when this show came out. Something like Pickle and Peanut is dumb and annoying, yeah, but only a handful of critics on YouTube actually reviewed that show. But because this show taps into something we're familiar with, that many people were fond of, it makes sense that a lot more people would be angrier about this show. As for why I'm reviewing this show, I actually think it fails in two different ways. Because if you look at it from the perspective of a comedy, this show fails at what it's trying to do. If you look at it from the perspective of a sequel or remake, it fails at what it's trying to do. And if you look at it from the perspective of a superhero show, it fails at what it's trying to do. Even Teemo Supremo might be better at the latter of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at two different episodes to see how the show fails in two different ways. In the first, we'll look at why the show isn't funny. In the second, we'll look at how the show fails as a reboot, or more broadly, as a meta commentary. The first episode we'll look at is Slapping Butts and Celebrating for No Reason. This episode is a satire of football, which is really the only sport I'm actually interested in, so this episode is specifically designed for viewers like me to enjoy. I would say that, except one of Teen Titans Go's biggest problem is how much contempt it seems to have for its target audience. It seems to use the approach of making fun of the audience itself rather than the topics the show covers. Here's what I mean. The jokes in this episode don't feel like they're making fun of football, but rather you, the audience member, for liking football. So the episode starts with the characters watching a football game and just making lazy observational jokes about football. And this might be a nitpick, but I'm going to point it out anyway. The characters all have football gear on, and none of that gear is the same color as either of the teams playing in the game they're watching. These jokes they're telling in the beginning don't really land because we're just thrust into this scenario with no context. Most of the time when shows have a problem beginning episodes, it's because they take their sweet time actually starting up. But here they don't spend enough time getting into the actual meat of what's going on. Aside from that, the only humor to really be had is the characters being loud and obnoxious, which I've already said is not funny.
Did someone say football?
So then the characters get in an argument about whether football or soccer is better, and it has no purpose in the episode. It's not funny, and Robin being the contrarian is so cliche for this show that 5 seasons in, it doesn't really matter if it was funny to begin with because it's gotten old regardless. If it were funny, then maybe they might have had an excuse to waste my time like they did. Otherwise, there's no reason for it to be in this episode. So apparently the plot of this episode takes place at the big game where apparently someone's planning an attack. And the picture they use looks suspiciously like Neyland Stadium, which, come on, everyone knows that the only big games that happen at that stadium is when an actual good team comes in there and beats Tennessee by 30. Oh yeah, also, this episode is notable because the Teen Titans actually fight crime in it! Seriously, this is why this show can never be a good comedy. Unless you want to reference the fact that they never fight crime like the movie does, having a superhero show without superheroes is like having a medieval show with knights that never use their swords. If you want to be a comedy, that's fine, but you can't forget that you actually chose the premise that you chose. Even in the bad episodes of The Fairly OddParents, Timmy actually wishes for something. Now, why am I even mentioning this problem? Because the episode actually lies. Throughout this episode, the Titans never actually fight crime. Now, this isn't Return of Slade levels of deceptive, but I'd put it on the level of shuffleboarding from SpongeBob.
We already won the tournament.
Don't say the episode is about something when it's not about that thing. Oh yeah, that's another thing. So the idea is to actually get into the game through a series of disguises, and this begins a running gag where the characters think Robin looks like B. Arthur. Yeah, kids wouldn't get that joke, and also random for the sake of random is not funny, which is essentially the rest of the episode. Yeah, Robin does eventually get in through another B. Arthur joke, so I guess you could say it was good that it actually advanced the plot. What little plot there actually was. Teen Titans do eventually defeat these monsters, but like I said, they do it in a joking way, which isn't really funny. They defeat them by boring them to death. The sad part is that they bore me to death before they do it to the monster. But honestly, this episode has such little plot and such little substance, there isn't much to talk about besides pointing out every joke and saying why they're not funny. And to be honest, that was the challenge in finding an episode of this show to review that wasn't super meta, as that's what I'm saving for part 2, in general. Like, I watched most of this show to find an episode to review in part 1, and most of the candidates were like that. And I guess I could explain why that's a problem with this show. Bad comedy is one thing, and it's usually an easy thing to explain. Maybe the jokes don't land, the timing is off, maybe they're super cliche, or maybe they mistake random for funny. But with this show, it's a bit deeper than that. Because this show's episodes are written so quickly, there's basically no sense of proofreading, and often episodes are written with no thought put in. If I had to guess, the non-meta episodes are the B episodes. Ones made so quickly they can put as much thought and effort as possible into self-referential humor in the A episodes. This particular episode, though, it seems to want to satirize football, but doesn't seem to know the difference between doing that and satirizing the audience of football, which is a major problem. There are jokes like this, for example.
And he deflated 4 footballs. But the most important statistic is that fans spend more time thinking about these pointless numbers than their personal finances.
That if you were an actual football fan who also happened to be a Teen Titans Go fan, might turn you off to the episode and maybe even the show. And football fans who are also Teen Titans Go fans are the most likely people who would actually watch this episode. There's really no excuse to alienate your audience this badly. Actually, that joke highlights another problem with Teen Titans Go that makes no sense. Earlier in the episode, the Titans went crazy about football, including Raven. But the episode makes constant condescending jokes like that said by the same characters that also claim to be football fans themselves in the same episode. I reiterate, you can't just put first drafts on TV. This is what happens when we write these episodes in a day and never proofread. Just one glance at the script, and a slight tweak would have fixed that joke. But the more I watch the episode that's just filled with jokes like that, and the more I think about that specific joke, the less sense it makes.
Oh, but Brayden, you're thinking way too deep about this. Kids don't care about consistency. All they want to do is laugh at a stupid cartoon.
I hear people say things like this all the time, and I have to wonder, how do you live your life as a person who is this insulting to children? If this came out when I was 7, I would most likely have the same criticisms. I might not articulate them as well as I do now, but that's because I'm a child. Just because your kid is stupid, that doesn't mean that every child is as stupid as them. Something being meant for children doesn't excuse its flaws. Imagine if we had that attitude towards quality control in any other thing meant for children.
Yeah, just feed my kid cyanide. It's okay. He's a kid. He'll eat anything.
It's the same argument. So excuse me if I'm tired of our children watching things that insult their intelligence like you're doing right now. Because the more people that think like that, the worse cartoons are gonna get. If you want to make fun of me for being an adult that reviews children's cartoons, go right ahead. I'll fire right back and make just as much fun of you for complaining about adults that review children's cartoons. Stay tuned for part 2, and have a good one.